The following is a editorial analysis of Sin and Evil by Andrew Shatkin. For many people in the modern world, sin and evil are somewhat foreign ideas and concepts. There are a number of reasons for this, I would suggest. One reason is that the advent of psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory, as articulated by Freud and Jung, the idea of moral choice and decision, has been somewhat called into question. Psychoanalysis makes the claim that our actions are the result of past experiences and genetics, and that they are not the decision of moral or choice. Another reason for the modern world's rejection of the idea of sin and evil is that in our society, we are told not to make judgments about other people or anything whatsoever. Another reason for the present rejection of the existence of sin and evil is that people often hold the view that we should be tolerant of other people's views, as long as they do not hurt anybody or violate any laws. Another reason for the modern society's rejection of the existence of evil and sin is the idea that we should be tolerant of other people's actions or views as long as they do not impinge on us. It is quite clear that there is a great deal of sin and evil in the world. The 20th century has witnessed numerous genocides, including the Holocaust, the Russian Revolution and its purges, the Armenian genocide, the genocide in Cambodia by Pol Pot, the genocide in Bosnia, the genocide in Rwanda, and the present situation in the Middle East, where persecution is occurring against some religious and ethnic groups. It is quite clear that there is a great deal of evil and sin in the world, and the issue is how to account for it. For many people, any sort of wrongdoing is simply a matter of legal or moral violation, and the matter is left at that. My view is that sin and evil have deeper root causes and manifestations. I think there is an explanation and understanding of sin and evil in the first 3 chapters of Genesis concerning the creation and fall of man. Many people see this story as a myth or fairy tale. After all, what do we have to do with 2 people in a garden and a snake that tempts the woman Eve to disobey God and eat of a tree that she was told not to? This event can be seen as a historical event, but it would be outside of present time. To understand the events in Genesis, we must understand and grasp that the events described there took place outside our present cosmic world system. Some people interpret these events as an allegory. Thus, a number of people understand these events or stories as allegorical, and others take them at their face value. We can understand them as God attempting to explain to us how evil came into the world. In presenting these events in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, He is coming down to our human understanding and trying to explain to us something that took place outside of human history and outside our present world in a sense. For me, I take these events as historical. I would like to speak for a few minutes about the creation story in Genesis. That story is found in chapters 1 and 2 of the book of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1, God says that He makes man in His image. Male and female He created them. And God tells these first parents to be fruitful and multiply, and have dominion over all fish, birds, and living things. It is clearly this creation story envisions a totally different world where there is no violence or hate, and animals, fish, and birds are the servants of our first parents. There is a second creation story in Genesis chapter 2, where God forms man out of the dust in the ground, breathes life into him, and places him in the Garden of Eden. In that garden is a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and a tree of life. And God commands Adam not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God then creates a helper for Adam, Eve, taking Eve and creating her from one of the ribs of Adam. These are the 2 creation stories in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Now I would like to talk about Genesis chapter 3, the fall story. In chapter 3, the serpent says to Eve, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden." And the woman replies, God had commanded her not to eat from one tree, since if she did so, she would die. The serpent says to the woman, "You will not die, that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, and it was desired to make one wise, she ate of it, and gave the same to her husband. To my sense and thought, the fall story is a deeply profound story and one which we must reflect on and seek to understand fully. The mistake that Eve made was pride. She was told that she would be like God. Thus Eve gave in to the failing of every person that has ever lived, namely pride. Eve gave in to the temptation and reached the emotional and intellectual conclusion that she was above herself, beyond herself, and equal to God, and not a created creature. None of us like to be told we are subject to anyone else, and that we have to do what we are told or commanded. A child will resist obedience to his or her parents, even though what they wish the child to obey is for their own good. Pride is the fallacy and mistake to think we are totally independent and autonomous. Pride is the mistake that our thinking is the right thinking and good thinking. Our pride always fools us to thinking we are great, and greater than others, and better than others. Eve made this mistake, and it brought about the entire fall of humanity in thinking that she could be a god. None of us wish to concede our limitations. None of us wish to concede our failings. None of us wish to be sufficiently honest with ourselves to say we are not equal with God, nor, in many senses, are we equal to each other. I will never compose a symphony, write an epic poem, or play professional baseball. The serpent fooled Eve and lured her into thinking that she could be something that she could never be and would never be. Pride is foolishness and stupidity. The pride of Eve resulted in such a destructive fall that it brought our present world, in its evil and destructive impulses, to its present situation. This story is true. All of us have shared this fall. All of us are fooled about ourselves. The events described in Genesis chapter 3 I believed happened since I know that all of us shared in this fall and in this act of pride, and all of us are not what we should be as persons, and probably cannot be what we should be as persons because of what happened to Eve and our first parents. This fall brought about a twisted, mixed up, and confused world, which instead of as envisioned by God, a world where love is shared, we live in a world of constant turmoil, hostility, which ends for all of us in death. The fall story in Genesis is the truth because we cannot escape who we really are, and its message is our great failing and pride and egotism. The English poet John Milton correctly analyzed the person of Satan in Book 2 of Paradise Lost. In Book 2 of this epic poem, we have the picture of Satan in his overweening and incredible pride, where he states he would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. Satan's pride and rebellion against God led to his destruction. That same pride he wishes to share with him in hell. The great sin of Satan, as depicted in Paradise Lost, was his arrogance and overwhelming pride. His great desire is to bring the fall of humanity into his thinking and dominion. Satan was cast out of heaven because he did not wish to obey, and wished to rule in torment rather than have eternal joy in heaven with God and his angels. He wants us to make the same mistake and constantly presses at our egotism, arrogance, and pride, seeking to bring us down and ultimately bring about our destruction. I would like to say something more here. Many people say the church is in a war with women. I pointed out in a video on stem cell research that Jesus was born from a woman, had women followers, and prohibited divorce. In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5 verse 28, Jesus says that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, makes her an adulteress, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Here, Jesus protects women from merely being cast off with a certificate of divorce, and states that a person who divorces his wife makes her an adulteress. It is quite clear that the status Jesus accorded women to the point of prohibiting a wife from being cast off as a piece of property, as might have been true of the culture at that time. Finally, in Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 3, verse 28, Paul states, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, or male or female, that all are one in Christ." This is the ultimate statement of gender equality in the church. In this verse in Galatians, Paul eliminates any gender distinction. I would also like to say one more thing. In the New York Times Book Review of October 18, 2015, a writer and author by the name Matt Ridley was interviewed. I do not know Mr. Ridley or his books, but you can be sure I accord him great respect as an author and person. Mr. Ridley said that the Bible was a messy compilation of tribal legends and outrageous bigotry. I beg to differ with Mr. Ridley with respect to his opinion. Throughout the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the Psalms, it is constantly stated and demanded concerning our responsibility to the poor and needy. In Luke chapter 6, verse 27, Jesus commands everyone to love their enemies. In Luke 6, verse 20, Jesus states that the poor are blessed. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 30, it is stated that the poor in spirit are blessed. In Luke 16, verse 20, we have the story of the rich man and Lazarus, in which it is specifically stated and commanded our responsibility for the poor and suffering around us, and that our failure to do so has consequences. In Matthew, verse 25, we are told what the criterion will be at the time of the last judgment, in which the sheep will be separated from the goats. We are told of our responsibility to give food to the hungry, drink to the thirsty, welcome to the stranger, and visit the sick, clothe the naked, and visit those in prison. In this picture of the Last Judgment, we are informed of the criterion for the Last Judgment, which will be how we treat others in this life. Finally, in Psalm 62, verse 9, the psalm says that men of low estate but a breath, men of high estate are a delusion, and in the balances they go up and they are lighter than a breath. This psalm states here and clearly informs us that class distinctions are irrelevant and meaningless in the end. I conclude and I say to Mr. Ridley that there is no more profound ethical and moral system than what I have pointed out and what is in the Bible. His statement that the Bible is a compilation of second-rate tribal legends and outrageous bigotry is belied by the depth and profundity of the biblical moral vision. As a classicist who spent many years studying Greco-Roman civilization and has read many of the classics, there is nothing resembling this thinking in the Greek or Roman world, which to the best of my recollection was elitist. I do not know if this elitism is present in our modern society, but if it is, then my understanding of elitism is a different understanding. For many, the elite are the wealthy and powerful. For the church in Christ, the elite are the poor, poor in spirit, and humble. I would like to add another thought to this essay. The church has been accused of being backward and anti-woman. I have pointed out the error in this thinking, but I would like to point out the story in the Gospel of John chapter 8, where a woman was brought to Jesus who had been caught in the act of adultery, and the Pharisees stated that Moses commanded them to stone this woman. Jesus' response was to say that those without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. This particular event concludes with what Jesus said to the woman, that he did not condemn her and told her to go and sin no more. Once again, Jesus raised the status of women in this event in the Gospel of John, where formerly she would have been subject to stoning. Jesus' response to her was to tell her to go and sin no more. Finally, I would like to comment on President Obama's statement that Black Lives Matter. I could no more fully agree with this statement than I am capable of, but I do point out that abortion decimates and destroys the African American community who are most subject to untrammeled abortion. Black lives do matter, and more so, innocent black children put to death on an ongoing basis matter a great deal. This concludes the viditorial by Andrew Shatkin, who may be reached by calling 516-932-8120 or by email at a.shatkin48@gmail.com.